Sepultura by Valerio Evangelisti, translated from the Italian by Sergio D. Altieri. 1. As Fernando Cuderos gave him the address of the favela, the taxi driver raised an eyebrow, but made no comment. It took them almost 45 minutes to reach the city limits of Sao Paulo. The shantytown sprawled across a trash-strewn hilltop, its multiple levels connected by wooden ladders. Nondescript metal huts, collapsed brick hovels, plywood shacks, even a few canvas tents, their sides held fast by large stones. Decrepit chalets in a decaying Switzerland. Carefully watching his footing, Fernando climbed the ladders, their rungs creaking ominously. At the summit, a friendly hand seized his briefcase and helped him onto the primitive deck. "Hello, Lieutenant," the kid exclaimed. He was no more than 20, his skin astonishingly dark. "I've been expecting you." The young operative escorted Fernando inside the largest hovel, its solitary brick wall supporting portions of coagulated tin. Gradually, his eyes adjusted to the gloom. "How'd you know I'd be here today?" Fernando asked gruffly, as the black kid guided him to the kitchen. Arminio, he remembered. The kid's name was Arminio. "Internet!" Arminio pointed to a computer on the table, its CRT pulsing with a screensaver. "Don't worry, sir. We send and receive all messages using PGP encryption. Government can't begin to decipher them." "Three cheers for technology," Fernando sneered. He dropped onto a rattan couch and, unbuttoning his short collar, rubbed the thick hair sprouting along his neck. "One of these days they'll invent a computer game called Revolucion. You kids will play it all day, and the hell was the real thing." Arminio took 2 cans from a refrigerator filled with nothing but beer, then shook his curly head. "Excuse me, Lieutenant, but I think technology has a lot to offer us." He handed Fernando 1 beer, popped the other open for himself. "Last month, somebody hacked into the main computer of a Japanese penitentiary, and before anybody knew what had happened, 2 prisoners escaped." "I must be getting old. I'd rather shake up a prison with a bomb than a keyboard." "Sometimes a keyboard works better." Arminio grinned and guzzled some beer. "I'm not saying we should become a bunch of geeks, but we gotta keep up with the times. That's what me and my buddies think." Fernando shrugged, making no attempt to hide his skepticism. "Down to business. What's the latest on Olavo Cuderos?" The question caught the kid off guard. His beer went down the wrong way, and he spat out an ember mist. "I thought you never wanted to hear your brother's name again." "I asked you a question." "Okay, sure. Olavo's with the Weed Rippers now. The Ministry of Security pays him a lot more than he ever made on the police force." Fernando scowled. Old news. "Keep talking." The kid grew uneasy, hesitating a few beats. "When the Reapers abandoned Mario Ferreira last month, they handed him over to Olavo. Everybody says it was your brother who used the melt on Mario." A shiver ran down Fernando's spine. He remembered all too well the moment he and the other guerrillas found the thing that had once been Mario Ferreira. Mario wasn't really a revolutionary, merely a malcontent, and not a particularly obnoxious one at that. Some of Fernando's comrades had vomited. Others simply stared in disbelief at the wreckage before their eyes. Fernando had instantly made a pledge to himself. He would kill the fucker who'd done this. But now he needed that very person. "You really think it was Olavo?" he whispered in a hoarse voice. "There weren't any witnesses, but Mario was in Olavo's custody at the time. And obviously, the Reapers had taught your brother how to use the melt." "You're a good spy, Arminio." Fernando set his beer on the floor and pressed his thumbs against his temples, as if to quell a sudden headache. He raised his head with considerable effort. In Buenos Aires, my superiors told me about a major operation. They want to free all the Sepultura inmates in one big break. It's been in the works for almost a year, and the whole thing turns on the melt. Evidently, the Continental Commander was right when he said Olavo could get it for us. What's the melt got to do with a prison break? The kid said. Glad you asked. If you can't figure it out, the government probably won't either. So now I need to track down my brother. Arminio raised his eyebrows. Aren't you Indios into Macumba and shit like that these days? Maybe you'll find him in some weird-ass religious ceremony. The kid meant Umbanda, but basically he knew what he was talking about. After the Cayova massacre, most of the survivors had converted to Umbanda. But not Olavo. My brother was never a joiner, Fernando said. Then the only way to get in touch with him is through a friend. You have any? Well, there's Tancredo. He's Indio, too. Half Indio, at least. Olavo and Tancredo and me, we grew up together. Tancredo's one of us now, but I don't know where he's hiding out. Sounds like a job for technology. The kid sat down at the computer screen, began tapping the keyboard. A moment later, he smiled broadly, showing blinding white teeth. Tancredo Passarino, is that him? Fernando nodded. Passarino is his Cayova name. I doubt he still uses it. He got slammed into Sepultura 3 years ago. Arminio still stared at the screen. They arrested him with another Cayova, Apollonio Teixeira, a common criminal. The smile disappeared. They're in the same block. The one where, you know. Apollonio. Fernando closed his eyes slightly, relaxing against the back of the couch. I remember Apollonio. Another pal of Olavo's. A bully. A street punk. And now he's in Sepultura, Arminio interrupted, begging them to let him die. 2. One day I'll kill you, even though you're my brother. No, as a matter of fact, I'll kill you because you're my brother. What most impressed Olavo Kuderos was the bantering voice in which Fernando spoke the death threat. If Fernando's tone had matched his words, of course, he would have attracted the attention of the other patrons. It was a sleazy place, but popular with certain members of the upper classes. Hushed conversations and soft laughter were the norm. No outbursts went unnoticed. Olavo maintained his grin, kept it firm. You'll kill me. Sure, little brother, unless I do you first. So we agree on the basic principle, Fernando said. The day we really meet, one of us has to die. Right. Only it won't be me. Fernando straightened his tie. He obviously hated being stuffed into elegant clothes, but the restaurant required them. But here and now, we're talking about something else. Your friends, our people. Our pathetic, non-existent people, Olavo said with a sneer. He finished wolfing down his beefsteak, then checked out an almost bare-assed girl, sashaying amongst the tables, offering the customers cigarettes. You're sure Tancredo's in Sepultura? Positive. Apollonio, too. Tancredo has a way of communicating with the Indios on the outside. Very bizarre, but it works. That's how I tracked you down. Tancredo going over to your crazy revolucion. Who would have guessed it? Olavo pushed the steak bone around on his plate. I would have bet on Apollonio instead. You really think you can break him out? Fernando nodded. An unexpected piece of scientific information fell into my lap. We need the melt. The melt? Plus some way to sneak it into Sepultura. Rumor has it, you can solve both problems for us. You have access to the melt, and your buddies with a guard named Lionel. I suppose I've heard wilder rumors in my time. Get us the melt, Olavo, and both your India friends will walk free, along with 100 others. Olavo poured himself a glass of California Burgundy. He emptied it in one swallow, as if it were mineral water. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. Something as risky as this, you'd better have it planned down to the last detail. Without warning, Fernando reached out and clamped his hand around his brother's hairy wrist. Stop pretending you don't believe in anything, Olavo, he said, his voice quivering. You haven't changed that much. Cigarettes, Chance? It was the girl carrying the tobacco tray, a brunette, sporting a radiant smile. Olavo welcomed the interruption. He laughed. No, sweetie. Turn around a bit. He took the girl's arm and turned her ass toward him. He fondled her buns, making her shudder, and then stiffened his fingers and gave her a painful pinch. The girl squealed and ran off, scattering cigarette packs everywhere. Disapproving mumbles wafted over from the other tables, but no one bothered to intervene. Olavo laughed again. That's what I believe in, Fernando. The rewards of power. The girly perks. Again, Fernando grabbed his brother's wrist. You believe in something else, too. Olavo broke the grip, putting his hands under the table so Fernando wouldn't see them tremble. He hated it when his brother got worked up about the Cayova. I'm Cayova, sure, he said. I've never denied it. The break will happen 4 nights from now. Plenty of time for you to get the melt and pass it to the kid. It won't be easy. The Rippers guard the stuff like gold. I'm sure you'll manage. Fernando lifted the burgundy bottle to the light, squinted to see if it still held any wine. He emptied the last few drops into his glass. You'll be impressed by the diversion we've cooked up. A direct attack on the prison. Nobody will notice what your pal Lionel is up to. Olavo frowned severely, but he made no reply. We'd better ask for the check, he muttered. Of course, it's on me. Fernando set both hands on the table, palms down. I meant what I said. One day, I'll have to kill you. Olavo forced a smile. You'll never get the chance. After the Sepultura break, your enemies will say to themselves, that Fernando, he might be a rat shit, but he's clever rat shit. It's time we blew him away. Rat shit? Fernando crumpled the tablecloth with his fists. He seemed ready to tear it in two. You and your Ripper pals hunt down innocent kids. His voice cracked. My brother, a Cayova who kills children. Olavo wanted to leave. The sooner the better. Listen, Fernando, I do my job. You do yours. In the end, we're both murderers. All right, sure, we're both murderers. But for the next 4 days, we're both Cayova too. Agreed? Look at your shirt, little brother. It's drenched with sweat. I could smell it from here. You need some cool night air. 3. It happened 6 times a day, every day, at the precise moment the guard opened the hatch and appeared on the steel catwalk suspended high above the pit. The inmates released furious screams. Apollonio Teixeira, lifted his tattooed arms, clenching his fists until his joints creaked. He simultaneously twisted those parts of his body, arms, shoulders, trunk, that emerged from the solidified glue, as if intending to climb out and go for a walk. An absurd idea, of course. His legs, plunged into the intractable ectoplasm that sealed his body up to the waist, had atrophied long ago. Shouts and curses flew across the vat, echoing off the moist iron walls. Usually at this juncture, the 5 guards would mock the inmates with insults of their own. If already drunk, they would rain down spit and urine on the naked human torsos planted in the glue, the descending liquids glimmering in the light emanating from the open hatch. This evening, however, the guards simply took turns sweeping a flashlight beam through the darkness of the pit, aiming it at one inmate after another. When the beam hit Apollonio, he screamed even louder. His fingers clawed at the air, as if mangling an invisible enemy's face. But he wasn't the one the guards wanted to harass. The shaft of light shifted to his friend Tancredo, a half-Indio like Apollonio, now straining to pull free of the glue, a pathetic howl breaking from his throat. The beam sliced past Tancredo and settled on the other political prisoners, forcing them to close their eyes. First Feliciano, then Miro, then Gomez. Mired a few feet from Apollonio, Ulysses vented his impotent rage. Apollonio stretched forward and, reaching out, touched Ulysses' black, brawny back. "Something must be happening," Apollonio spoke loudly enough to make himself heard over the roar of the 115 furious voices. Ulysses kept waving his fist toward the catwalk. "Something serious, yeah," he answered without turning around. "Moises always said the revolution would get here sooner than we imagined." He resumed shouting, his whole body now trembling as if possessed. Old Moises' skeletal frame writhed in the ectoplasm on the far side of the vat. He was the sole survivor of the prison riot that had convulsed Carandiru, Latin America's most formidable penitentiary, on October 2nd, 1992. The government had turned the Carandiru uprising into a bloodbath. 80 inmates slaughtered, scores more wounded. Moises was found beneath a pile of corpses, his left leg a tangled mess of bullet wounds. 2 panicky paramedics had proceeded to amputate it then and there, even as the searchlight beams flooded Carandiru and the walls resounded with the siren's piercing wail. Now the ectoplasm gripped Moises' remaining leg, while the badly sutured stump rested on the sticky surface. Sepultura, Sao Paulo's maximum security prison, had been built in response to the Carandiru riot. A few years later, cyanoanalytic glue was developed as an aid to surgery. The adhesive was ideal for closing wounds and staunching hemorrhages. But soon, some fertile minds in the Brazilian government came up with a novel application. These geniuses found then, when combined with elastine, cyanoanalytic glue became a kind of synthetic flesh that fused seamlessly with human tissue, a pulsing, breathing, organic extension of any person unfortunate enough to touch it. The government picked Moises for the initial test. The chemical quickly subsumed his remaining leg, trapping him in the great frozen lake of glue. For the first 6 months, he was the pit's only prisoner, alone, in the cold darkness. The ectoplasm absorbed his excretions, feces, urine, sweat, combining their molecules with its own. Then 2 more inmates were locked in the rigid soup. Both went insane, dying of despair. But Moises was crazy to begin with, and so he survived, raging against, but never defeating the glue, inadvertently assuring the government that the new constraint system worked perfectly. "You're gonna cut that shit out, or what, you fuckers?" Sergeant Macaron's raspy voice, made louder by a bullhorn, sounded less confident than usual. "One of these nights, I'll stop feeding you. I'll let you rot in the muck." On a normal evening, the guards liked to indulge in their favorite pastime. Instead of lowering the dinner baskets on ropes, they would reach inside, grab the prisoner's food, and, taking careful aim, pelt the mired man with bones, bread, and pieces of meat. Careening off the inmate's back and chests, most of the food fell out of reach. The guards loved to watch the man flail about grotesquely in a quest for the scraps. Finally, the guards would dump a few buckets of drinking water on the prisoners' heads. But this evening, none of that happened. The baskets were lowered smoothly, and Apollonio easily grabbed one. He pulled out a piece of meat and a loaf of stale bread, passing them to Ulysses, who was still turned around, cursing the guards. Apollonio stared in amazement at the remaining food. He had obtained it much too easily. No doubt about it. Somebody was causing really serious trouble outside. A few minutes later, the guards retrieved the baskets, then switched off the flashlight and retreated through the hatch. Again, darkness filled the pit. The shouts became whispers, soon fading into silence. Only Tancredo's gut-wrenching scream echoed for a moment longer, as disturbing as a cry from a tomb. 4. Olavo Kuduros joined the weed reapers as they climbed the snaking stone path toward the favela shanties ranged along the hill. Making no sound, they headed toward the feeble glow of the campfires that, higher up, flickered outside the huts, shacks, hovels, and tents, just beyond the mounds of trash. Chugus adjusted the focus on his infrared scope. "Got him, the little ones. They're 3 years old, some maybe 4. The others? 12, 13. No sentries, only dogs." Murmurs of satisfaction wafted through the weed rippers. The Ministry of Security paid 1,000 kuzerios for the severed head of a child under 6, 800 for the head of a school-aged boy. There was plenty of easy money gathered around these campfires. As the rest of the group slipped past him, Olavo thought about the phone conversation he'd had with Fernando that morning. He heaved a sigh, distressed by the thought of betraying his comrades. Before he'd become a reaper, Olavo had spent 7 years in the police force, so murdering children didn't seem particularly novel or wrong to him. Whenever those little shits weren't snorting themselves into a stupor, they were stealing anything they could lay their hands on. Letting them grow up merely meant breeding a new generation of thieves, as if the city didn't have enough of those already. No, sympathy for urchins had nothing to do with why Olavo was now determined to fire his assault rifle at the heads of Chugus and the others. The reason was Tancredo, and Tancredo was reason enough. Like Olavo, Tancredo had Kiowa blood in his veins, probably even more than Olavo, and that blood had moved Tancredo to action. A few years after he'd left the tribe, thousands of Kiowa, nearly the whole population, had committed suicide in an unthinkable protest against the government's invasion of their ancient terriero. Shocked and appalled, Tancredo had immediately grabbed the shotgun and taken up a position outside a police station, opening fire on every cop who came in or out. Olavo, a cop himself, had not appreciated Tancredo's choice of target, but he fully understood the man's rage. "Great! They've got no defenses," Chugus whispered. "Remember, keep the heads intact." In the past 12 hours, Olavo's opinion of Chugus had plummeted to a new low. even as his begrudging respect for Fernando had increased. The melt wasn't inside Sepultura yet. Hell, it wasn't even in the insurgents' hands. And yet Olavo had gone ahead and ordered his men to open fire on the prison. That's how much confidence he had in Olavo. "Little brother, you picked the right indio." The narrow, blood-red beams of the Ripper's laser scopes sliced through the gloom. A girl in a tethered smoke sat next to a dog much bigger than she. She stared in amazement at the little crimson dot skittering across her chest. An instant later, a .308 caliber slug drilled through her lungs. The pack of dogs went for the attackers. 2 overlapping bursts of full auto gunfire were enough to cut the animals to ribbons. A few kids tried to run for it. The high-speed bullets mowed them down. Most of the survivors simply stood motionless, watching the dancing laser beams in a sort of enchanted stupor. But death didn't come for them this night. Instead, 3 rounds slammed into the back of Chugus's head, disintegrating it like a ripe melon. Chugus's comrade Jorge was hit next, in the back, the impact throwing him to the ground. When the Rippers realized where the bullets were coming from, they whipped around to return fire. Too late. Olavo's FAMAS G2 was a powerful weapon, powerful enough to demolish a truck piece by piece. It took him just 15 seconds to silence the Ripper's guns. Olavo's clip was empty. Calmly he reloaded. The children had fled. A dog yelped desperately. The full moon illuminated the corpses of the 6 Rippers lying in the trash. Olavo shifted the rifle's action to single shot, then put a coup de grace into each head. The hundreds of derelicts huddled inside the shacks must have heard the din of the skirmish, but nobody dared show his face. Olavo walked down the hill, keeping his weapon aimed at the few shabby windows set within the walls of wood and metal. There was enough moonlight for him to maintain a fast pace. All around him, except for the distant barking, the favela was silent as a grave. He reached the Ripper's van, opened the back door, grunted in satisfaction. The object of his search protruded from beneath the seat. Fernando and his friends would be happy. He slammed the door and walked to the front of the van. He tossed his emptied rifle inside, then got behind the wheel. 5. Sleeping in the ectoplasm was an ordeal, but every inmate had to endure it. Only one technique worked. Lean forward, bend your back, and rest your head on your forearms. At first, Apollonio had found the procedure unbearable. The contorted posture, plus the freezing air of the pit. Only an extremely low temperature would keep the cyanolytic glue in a solid state, sent excruciating pains through his bones. But after a few months in the vat, even this torment had acquired a bizarre normalcy. Tonight, however, no one was sleeping. The 115 despairing men, blacks for the most part, kept their ears wide open, hoping to catch any noise coming from the watchtowers and the sprawling junkyard and the stinking favela beyond. At one point they thought they heard gunfire, but how to be sure? The walls of the pit muffled every sound. "I think Tancredo got a message out last month," whispered Ulysses. "Another one yesterday." "Maybe that has something to do with the gunfire," Apollonio said. Once again, he found himself admiring old Moises' cleverness in encouraging everyone to scream whenever the guards opened the hatch. Usually the guards made no attempt to silence them. Why should they care whether the existence of the pit and the suffering of the occupants was broadcast far and wide? The glue hadn't been conceived primarily as the ultimate in prisoner control. First and foremost, it was a deterrent. Every dissident, every insurgent, Every criminal knew that the voracious ectoplasm was there, waiting to swallow his legs. True, the human rights organizations periodically lodged formal complaints, but Brazil's leaders sneered at them, just as they'd sneered at the protests that had followed the Carandiru massacre. The government had acknowledged only 8 dead after Carandiru, though the photographs and the witnesses attested to a slaughter 10 times that large. After all, it was more convenient for the global community if the status quo remained unchanged in Brazil. Butchering Amazon Indios, hunting down street kids, torturing political prisoners, jailing protesters. None of these things happened. Not really. If occasionally an amnesty group heard the screams that issued from Sepultura 6 times a day, its members would find no international forum in which to express their dismay. To be sure, a powerful government would, on occasion, formally accuse another nation of human rights violations, but only when the atrocity in question somehow threatened to disturb the new international order. Moises' brilliant idea had been to make the chorus of screams and moans a regular event, so that Tancredo, the loudest Indio in the vat, could occasionally weave a Kiowa chant into the cacophony without arousing suspicion, altering words to create a secret message for his fellow tribesmen on the outside. Even if Tancredo's listeners couldn't catch every syllable, they would get the basic meaning. Thanks to a couple of sympathetic guards, the prisoners knew that some Indios beyond Sepultura occasionally heard their messages. Unfortunately, the inmates' one true ally, the young guard Lionel, was rarely able to pass replies along, for the ever-vigilant Sergeant Macaron closely scrutinized his men as they stood on the catwalk. Only when some emergency disrupted the prison, sending Macaron and company scrambling down the corridors and along the outer ramparts, could Lionel furtively relay a message from the outside world. In the past 3 years, that had happened a mere 7 times. "Is this the night, Moises?" Apollonio asked. "Is this the night that Revolucion comes to Sepultura?" "Tell us, Moises," said Gomez. Moises reached toward the stump of his leg, lifted it an inch from the surface of the glue, and then set it down in a slightly different position. 3 months ago, Lionel tossed me a crumpled note, the crazy old man said. I opened it, read it, ate it. "What did it say?" Feliciano demanded. "The Continental Commander has had his eye on Sepultura for almost a year." Moises' voice became suddenly nonchalant. "Anybody here know what the melt is?" No one answered, but everyone knew. Apollonio sensed a collective shudder pass through the man in the ectoplasm. The melt, quite likely the worst torture ever conceived. A pressure-activated polymer called phenylalanine was mixed with ATP phosphate and injected into a prisoner's veins. Coursing through his blood, the compound radically increased the victim's body temperature. Instantly, his muscles distended to twice their normal size, only to shrink again at the same blinding speed. The tortured man would watch his limbs elongate suddenly, then contract into stumps, then elongate again. The pain was unimaginable. When it reached his brain, the fiery polymer turned the neurons to a boiling mush. Throughout the ordeal, a uniformed torturer would promise the prisoner an antidote, if he would simply name his fellow conspirators or admit to a crime. But in fact, there was no antidote. Insane with agony and terror, many victims screamed out false confessions. In the end, the guards buried the prisoner's remains, now a shapeless tangle of mutilated tissue. Needless to say, the Brazilian government never employed the procedure overtly. Instead, they used the weed rippers. Every ripper team carried a few vials of phenylalanine ATP, and they rarely hesitated to use it on insurgents and desaparecidos. All of this despite the fact that dealing in the polymer was strictly prohibited, a severely punished crime. Before finding his voice, Apollonio had to swallow several times. "Why the fuck you talking about the melt? If they wanted to torture us that way, they would have done it already." "The melt destroys elastin as well as flesh," Moises said. Apollonio couldn't see Moises' face, but he imagined the old man was grinning. "It really destroys elastin?" Gomez said. Moises said, "You didn't know that?" 6. Fernando scanned the junkyard, watching as his men, dressed in camouflage fatigues, squatted just outside the barbed wire fence, taking cover behind the rusting frames of derelict automobiles. They unleashed a few more volleys toward Sepultura's thick, hulking walls. From the nearest watchtower, a .50 caliber Browning machine gun returned their fire, the armor-piercing tracers painting yellow-orange streaks across the night. Fernando knew perfectly well that Sepultura lay beyond the range of their assault rifles. The point wasn't to pick off guards, but to force them to call for reinforcements. With the back of his hand, he wiped the sweat from his forehead, dirtying his skin with black camouflage paint. He checked his watch. Where the hell was Olavo? 10 more minutes, maybe less, and the Brazilian army would swoop down on them like vultures. He squinted into the night, uncertain whether to order a retreat. A searchlight beam sliced through the darkness. Fernando glimpsed a human shape, running in a half-crouch among the skeletal cars, trying to avoid the tracer bullets from the watchtowers. "Olavo," he thought, sighing in relief. When his brother was only 2 yards from the insurgent's position, Fernando darted out and dragged him to the ground. "Olavo, you dumb fuck! Get down, or you'll be slaughtered like pigs!" Olavo's lips lifted in a half smile. "I got the stuff." "News of the century! Has the kid shown up yet?" Olavo shook his head. "It's just a matter of waiting. I'm sure Macron has called in every last guard on the payroll. Did you visit the Babalao?" "I left his shack at dusk." Olavo gestured impatiently toward the blackness all around them. "Go, now, and may God bless your motherfucking revolucion." Fernando glowered at Olavo, then leapt to his feet. "Move out!" he shouted, waving his M16. "Move out!" His men backed away from their positions, sliding into the night. Before taking off himself, Fernando squeezed his brother's shoulder. "We're even now. You got us the melt, and your friends are about to walk free." "Yeah, if they can still walk," Olavo muttered, as the darkness claimed Fernando. More Browning tracers streamed from Sepultura, puncturing the corroded car bodies. Olavo clung to the ground, arms around his head, swarms of shattered glass and squalls of metal splinters flying everywhere. A few seconds later, the barrel of a Galil assault rifle rammed his spine, right between his shoulder blades. "Hey, we got one of them!" barked a voice, both angry and satisfied. So, the fucking army had arrived. Instead of turning on his back, Olavo pushed his face closer to the earth. "I'm not who you think," he said, controlling his voice, projecting calm. "I'm a weed reaper, fully authorized by the Sao Paulo Ministry of Security. I've got my ID on me." "Listen to this, asshole," the soldier replied, addressing unseen companions. Olavo heard running footsteps, coming closer and closer.
"If you're a ripper, what are you doing here?"
I heard gunfire, so I thought I'd give you guys some backup. Cautiously, Olavo lifted his head. Just performing my patriotic duty. The barrel of the Galil retreated, but only slightly.
"Show me this famous ID of yours."
The soldier's voice, all Olavo could see were his combat boots, dripped with hostility. Olavo reached into the back pocket of his pants, pulled out his ID. He lifted the metal badge as slowly as possible. The soldier jerked it out of his hand. A seeming eternity went by.
"All right, you're cool,"
the soldier finally said, still hostile.
"Get up and stay alert."
He tossed the badge to the ground and walked away. Olavo scrambled to his feet. The army was reconnoitering the entire junkyard, checking every vehicle. The searchlight beams kept flashing from the watchtowers, their blinding glare sweeping across the heaps of trash toward the favela. The shooting had stopped, but that didn't matter. The guards were certain to keep manning the walls for another hour at least. Olavo rushed away from the junkyard and, hiding in the shadows, made his way along the outer ramparts toward the huge pylons flanking the prison entrance. A large truck rumbled into view, stopping before the gate. 20 men in civilian clothes climbed out of the bay. Sergeant Macaron's reinforcements. Most of the guards were dressed haphazardly. Some cursed through their teeth. The twin portals pivoted slowly, creaking and groaning, and the sleepy men started stumbling into the prison yard. Olavo approached one of them, a bony youth with hollow features. "Hello, Lionel." The kid tossed him a bewildered look. "Whoa! What the hell you doing here, man? They wanted you rippers on the scene too?" Olavo didn't answer. He dug a hand into a pocket of his field jacket, pulled out a cloth-wrapped package, passed it to Lionel. "Get this to Tancredo," he muttered gruffly. "Now!" "Now?" Lionel was flabbergasted. "How the hell?" "Don't think about it, kid. Just do it. All the guards are on the walls." Lionel opened his mouth as if to argue some more, but he didn't say anything. He grabbed the wrapped object, quickly stuffing it underneath his shirt. "So the attack was just a ploy?" he muttered. "Hey, we got a real bright guy here." Olavo's expression softened. He slapped the kid on the back. "Good luck." Olavo turned and started away, leaving the prison almost at a run. The night was young, and he had another call to make. 7. Down in the pit, no one spoke. Apollonio tried to fend off the cold by wrapping his arms around his bare chest. He reflected on Moises' words. Evidently, the melt polymer attacked elastin, and elastin was indeed a component of the ectoplasm. But that didn't mean the melt could free them. The damn glue was an extension of their skin, blended with its very molecules. Not surprisingly, when an inmate died, his body could only be removed through a chainsaw connected to a gantry. In a matter of minutes, the spinning blade would carve a rectangular solid from the glue surrounding the corpse, after which the guards abruptly winched the entire block free of the vat. Quite a contrast to the lengthy and elaborate immersion process. Somewhere in the universe, there might be a substance that dissolved the glue without destroying the attached flesh. But the melt polymer wasn't it. The stuff was potent, but hardly magical. And yet, Apollonio was not without hope. Moises' grand scheme, his crazy idea of lacing the daily screaming rituals with messages from Tancredo, had spawned within Apollonio a dream that had never died. This dream had enabled him to survive 3 years of demonic torments. As more years went by, would he continue to elude despair? Doubtful. It was as if he held in his hands the eroded stump of a burning candle, fearful that his own mournful sighs would snuff the flame. The silence deepened. The longer it continued, the more anxious Apollonio and the other prisoners became. Suddenly, high up, the hatch opened, bathing the catwalk in pale light, and everyone flinched as a shadowy human form started along the little bridge. Apollonio recognized their visitor. It was Lionel, the young guard who acted as the go-between, connecting the vat to the larger world. Occasionally, Lionel would drop a crumpled note near Moises' stump, or mutter a Kiowa spell that the Indios in the glue knew to be a greeting from their brothers on the outside. The guard stopped in the middle of the catwalk, glanced down. "Tancredo, you hear me? I got some goods for you." "Talk to Moises," Tancredo answered from the darkness. "He's the boss around here." "Don't fucking waste my time," Lionel protested. "I've only got a minute." He peered into the gloom. "Moises, you awake?"
Yeah, you're bringing us some vials, right?
"Uh-huh."
Open them up and pour the stuff in the ectoplasm, Moises instructed Lionel. Don't let it splash on us. And don't get it on your fingers.
"This is bullshit," Lionel groaned.
"Just do it," said Moises.
Lionel turned on his flashlight. The beam sliced downward, searching among the torsos until it found a large empty patch of glue. Apollonio watched as the kid manipulated whatever it was he held in his hands. Seconds later, a thin stream trickled into the pit. The ectoplasm sizzled. "Now what?" Lionel asked, after he had emptied the last vial.
"From this moment on, anything could happen."
Moises' normally calm voice crackled with tension.
"Are they still fighting outside?"
"It's over now. The army showed up."
"Then get away, fast, and thank Olavo for us."
Moises paused.
"Thank you too, Lionel."
The kid switched off his flashlight, then disappeared from the catwalk, leaving the hatch slightly ajar. Gloom enveloped the pit. A moment later, Apollonio felt sudden warmth surge through legs he'd thought had atrophied for good. He yelled with joy. His fellow prisoners also cried out, their exultant shouts resounding through the vat.
"Hold on, boys!"
Moises' sober voice stifled the inmates' enthusiasm.
"Don't think you can escape so easily. The glue is flesh of our flesh."
"But I can feel my legs again!" Gomez exclaimed.
"An illusion!"
Moises' voice was like ice.
"What you feel isn't your legs. It's the ectoplasm. The melt polymer can't dissolve the glue. It can only make it come alive."
"Alive?" Apollonio screamed. He had never before felt such terror.
Phenylalanine ATP has the power to transform any organic substance, turning it into artificial fibers with the properties of human cardiac tissue,
Moises continued.
These fibers spontaneously dilate and contract, which is why the melt is so excruciating, and why it's having such an interesting effect on the glue around their legs.
"What the fuck are you saying, man?" Apollonio cried in exasperation. "Are we gonna get out of this muck or not?"
A long silence. "We'll never get out of it,"
Moises spoke slowly, deliberately.
"But we can make it move. Very soon, the ectoplasm will become our slave, obeying our nerve impulses as they travel from our brains to our legs."
A numbing despondency overcame the prisoners, rendering them mute. But then, suddenly,
Tancredo burst out laughing, a disturbing, gurgling hysteria that echoed off the vat walls. "Oh man, that's fucking great!" he shouted sarcastically. "We'll never walk again, but that doesn't matter, 'cause we can play mind games with this big shitload of glue." Curses, shouts of anger, cries of disbelief. Moises waited for his comrades to quiet down. Then he said, pointedly, "Know something, Tancredo? Snakes don't walk. They don't need to." Apollonio sank into a well of fear, even colder than the air in the vat. He closed his eyes, shivering. 8. Olavo halted the Land Rover before a Kunset hut, slightly bigger than the other favela shacks that dotted the hills across the ravine from the penitentiary. Climbing out, he glanced toward Sepultura. Searchlights swept the walls and the junkyard beyond, setting the night ablaze, making the prison visible even from this distance. A deep silence had settled on the shantytown. Olavo hid the FAMAS assault rifle under the seat, locked the Rover, and ran to the front door of the Knesset hut. A single knock, 3 quick ones, a final knock. The door opened a crack. A pair of huge brown eyes peered at him from within a dark face. A gruff, mistrustful voice asked, "What do you want, mister?"
"You knew I was coming. Let me in."
Olavo pushed the door back, shoved the man aside, and entered the one-room hut. The interior light was so intense, he had to blink several times before his eyes adjusted to the glare. About 15 Indios, men and women, their skin much darker than Olavo's, sat on chairs along the walls. Near the center of the room, an earthen altar held a sandstone statue dressed in red and black, encircled by clay pots, from which projected offerings of cigars, small tridents, and bottles of pemba. Ancient wooden icons of Saint Barbara, Saint Jerome, Saint Anthony, and Saint Spedito hung from the corrugated walls. Olavo approached a skinny old man, perched in a high-backed chair, wearing a multicolored pebble necklace.
"You're the Babalao, right?"
The old sorcerer's stare was hostile.
"And you are possessed by Kiumba, evil spirits. I could tell that the instant you appeared at our door. I would have refused you entrance, Olavo Kuderos, had your brother not asked us to hear your plea." "Possessed by Kiumba," Olavo said with a shrug. "Maybe you're right. I'm no expert in candomblé." "We practice Umbanda," the old man corrected him in a chastising tone. "The candomblé is only a dance." "Like I said, I'm ignorant, but many people insist that your magic really works." Olavo glanced around the room. A white-haired mummy guarded the rear door, seated on a stool and encircled by stubby lighted candles. This was surely a representation of Preto Velo, the first slave brought to Brazil from Africa. Olavo had heard of the Preto Velo cult, and he still couldn't help shuddering. Even more disturbing than the mummy was the hostility emanating from the people in the room, as chilling as an icy wind. He forced himself to speak in a steady voice. "Perhaps Fernando told you." "You hope we can summon spirits here," the Babalao said. "Spirits, yes, but not your benevolent Orisha," Olavo said. "My purpose requires Igam, spirits of the dead." "That's very dangerous. More dangerous than you can imagine," the old sorcerer said. "No doubt." Olavo raised his open hands. "And I don't want them showing up here. Somewhere else." The Babalao's stare hardened. "I don't understand. Where do you want the Igam to appear? Olavo grimaced. He pointed toward the window, speaking quickly to hide his discomfort. Inside Sepultura. Is that possible? The old man's eyes shone brighter. For a while, he said nothing. Then at last he muttered, "You don't believe in Umbanda, and furthermore, your soul is corrupt. You kill children for money. You come here to our terriero, asking us to risk our lives by conjuring the Igam. My question is this: why should we help you?" Waves of whispered anger rushed about the hut. Olavo realized he was dripping sweat, and not because of the heat. He swallowed a bubble of saliva. "It's not me you're helping," he rasped. "There are Umbanda believers inside Sepultura. A man named Tancredo. Many more. All of them suffering. They're the ones who want you to summon the Igam. I'm only the messenger." "Summon the Igam," the old man echoed, fingering the stones around his neck. "But which Igam? To evoke evil spirits, you must know their names." "They're called the Kayova. Do you understand who I'm talking about?" The ancient priest winced. "The tribe that gave itself to death?" "Yes, precisely. Those are the Igam I'm asking you to summon, the spirits of the Kayova, inside Sepultura." More whispering filled the hut. The old man remained silent for a moment, staring empty-eyed at Olavo. "The Kayova, when they existed, never practiced Umbanda," he said in a hushed voice. "Their pai spoke with different gods." Olavo hunched his shoulders, annoyed. "My brother says their beliefs were very close to yours." He remembered Fernando telling him that the Kayova god, Nanromoy Papa, was equivalent to the Umbanda deity Oshala, and how the Kayova Aivukue demons resembled the Igam of the Umbanda. "Yes, that may be." The old sorcerer's extended finger pointed first to the garbed statue, and then to the small tridents. "Perhaps your brother told you this whole terreiro is a holy ground to compadre Exu. Do you know who that is?" "Like the Christian devil." The Babalao shook his head violently. "No, never. Exu is good, though temperamental. He angers easily, pulls pranks, goads people into arguing with each other. But he is not Satan. We cannot summon the Kayova dead except through Exu. Given his trickster nature, the results will be unpredictable." "I'm willing to risk it," Olavo said. "Very well. For the Umbanda believers of Sepultura, let us begin." Instantly, 3 of the seated Indios took up drums and began pounding out the rhythm. The old man jumped to his feet and raised his arms. "Leroy Exu!" the Babalao cried. "Leroy Exu!" the others repeated furiously, rising from their chairs. A dissonant chorus erupted. "Exu teriri di Umbanda, mora na en cruzil hada, y chegada a sua hora, no rompar da madrugada." The beating of the drums built to a frenzy. 9. Apollonio felt the heat in his legs intensify. Instinctively, he tried to move his knees. Nothing happened, though the ectoplasm continued to ripple all around him. Or so it seemed. In the dark, it was impossible to be sure. "We must command the glue to rise!" Moises shouted, more excited than ever.
The ectoplasm is a semiconductor now, just like the human body. The electrical impulses from our nervous systems can penetrate it.
Carniero, a Bahia drug dealer who'd been in the vat a year and a half, spat out a curse.
Shut your mouth, old prick! Take that science crap and shove it!
He seemed about to elaborate, but then his tone suddenly changed.
Oh shit! It's true! I can feel the stuff move!
Me too! Shock and fear distorted Ulysses' voice. The yells of surprise grew louder, filling the pit. Much to his amazement, Apollonio found that if he tried to shake his legs while visualizing himself walking, the ectoplasm trembled and swelled, forming a sort of wave. He slid his hands along the glue surface. Soon it would reach the temperature of a human body. Suddenly, an image flashed through his mind. A circle of 20 naked men sitting in a jungle clearing, beating fiercely on wooden drums. Now, a different picture came to him. Deep in the forest, 2 great iron gates swung back, as if shaken open by the pounding of the drums. The gates abruptly vanished, but the drums lingered in Apollonio's ears. He froze, mouth open, his blood like ice.
What the hell's happening?
Mira squealed like a frightened cat.
I see gates opening! Don't worry about it!
Moises cut him off, his voice hard and commanding.
Now we must imagine we're jumping! Imagine we're jumping together, all the way to the ceiling! Come on, do it!
Apollonio obeyed mechanically. A tentacle of ectoplasm encircled his body and lifted him toward the catwalk. By the dim light streaming from the open hatch, he saw the underside of the bridge. He reached out, tried to grab a strut. Impossible. The tentacle contracted. The whiplash almost broke Apollonio's back. He plummeted, yanked downward by the tentacle, and as he struck the ectoplasm, an excruciating pain shot through his spine. He tried to organize his thoughts. Once again, the circle of naked drummers flooded his mind. Only now, the image was clear, and he saw his entire tribe. Thousands of Indios, urging the drummers to their wild rhythms. The Indios stared toward the forest, as if something unthinking would soon leap from its depths, an entity they both eagerly anticipated and greatly feared. In the center of the circle, a pie danced frantically, his bare feet kicking up clouds of dirt. But what in the world was a pie?
Let's try again,
Moises commanded, breathing heavy.
This time, we must all shout together as we try to grab the catwalk. The ectoplasm will obey, you'll see.
Apollonio snapped out of his reverie. Before him Ulysses, barely visible in the gloom, writhed from head to waist, screaming incomprehensibly.
Oh, boy! Oh, boy!
A terrible awareness took hold of Apollonio. The trickster Exu had opened those iron gates, and now Oshumare, the rainbow serpent, was streaming through the gap. Surely this was the entity that the Indios were expecting to burst from the forest. But how did Apollonio know these things? Again, he concentrated on jumping. The entire ectoplasmic mess surged upward, bearing the 115 embedded men toward the ceiling. Apollonio screamed madly, and the others screamed with him. The ectoplasm carried him higher than before, level with the catwalk. He thrust out his hands, seizing the metal handrail. He attempted to lift his legs, but it was the ectoplasm that moved instead. The mass slithered over the handrail and streamed along the catwalk. dragging the shrieking torsos. Seeing the hatch hurtle toward him, Apollonio grew certain he would be crushed against the jam. And then, astonishingly, the river of glue contracted. First Apollonio, then Ulysses, then Moises, Tancredo, Feliciano, Carniero, Miro, Gomez, and the others passed through the hatch unscathed. The ectoplasm dilated, filling a corridor jammed with pipes and illuminated by sputtering neon. Apollonio believed he was about to die, though fear of oblivion was no longer the force that sent 100 fragmented notions tumbling through his head. What fired his mind was a need for revenge, the same need his tribe now felt as they honored the hideous scaled entity their drums had summoned from the jungle. His tribe? He had no tribe. The Kiowa were gone. He stared at the cold brick walls as the glue dragged the prisoners down the corridor. He wanted to see those walls destroyed. He prayed for their annihilation by some superhuman force. Eager to comply, the ectoplasm continued to dilate. 10. Olava observed the early stages of the summoning, the drumming, the chanting, the dancing Babalao and his acolytes, with a sort of bored disgust. But now came an unexpected event. A young mulatto leapt into the middle of the room, his lanky body twisting furiously. A narrow leather band encircled his head. A checkered cloak of red and black hung from his bony shoulders, and a loop of threaded stones, some white, some red, swung from his neck. In his right hand he gripped a trident, twirled it deftly like a baton. "Laroi exu! Laroi exu!" the other Indios chanted, and Olavo understood that the mulatto was impersonating the trickster god. As if inspired by the avatar's demanded dance, the dozen worshippers threw themselves to the floor and beat their heads against the dirt, apparently without feeling pain. The lithe mulatto strode towards the pots with their wealth of offerings. He grabbed a cigar, lit it on the nearest candle, and struck it between his teeth, sucking the smoke into his lungs. Next, he snatched a trident, tucking it under his armpit, and finally he grabbed a bottle of pemba. Taking the cigar in hand, he filled his mouth with the liquor. He spat pemba onto the pots, and then kicked over the candles. The altar burst into flames. The drummers pounded out their preternatural thunder. Fascinated, Olavo watched as the Babalao approached Axu's avatar and handed him a huge knife. A woman came forward, her eyes rolled back, carrying a live cock. The mulatto drank another mouthful of pemba, used the rest to douse the fire, and set the empty bottle on the floor. He opened the bird's throat with a quick, cruel slash. Blood spattered the sculpted icons hanging from the walls. "Ow, baboy! Ow, baboy!" the boy cried, flagellating Saint Bartholomew's image with a necklace of yellow stones. The mulatto nodded. He held the cock, still jerking from the shock of the blade, before the icon. He allowed some blood to drip onto Saint Bartholomew's crudely carved face. The flayed saint wept red tears. Olavo stood and stared, transfixed by the sacrifice, stunned by the delirious drumbeats. A tug on his arm brought him back to reality. It was the Babalao, his pupils so dilated they completely filled his corneas. Olavo felt the old man's breath on his face as the Babalao whispered in his ear. "We did it!" the sorcerer rasped. "Exu freed the Egum for you. And the serpent god, Oshumare, came with them." The Egum and the serpent have merged! Olavo's shocked eyes darted toward a window, its frame shorn of glass. He looked at Sepultura's enormous profile. What will happen now? The Babalao laughed, one ugly burst of delight after another. Go ask the enemies of Igam! He took a fresh bottle of Pemba from the altar, bringing the blood-spattered container to his lips. 11. Apollonio watched the corridor walls crumble, brick torn from brick by the gluttonous monster, this thing to which his body was now a mere appendage. The ectoplasm kept moving, sliding down shattered hallways and flowing beneath fractured ceilings. The screaming men, rooted in the glue like cilia, sprouting from a gigantic worm. Strangely enough, a kind of demented pride filled Apollonio's heart, quelling his terror. Body and spirit, the doomed inmates had melded with the lurching mass. Finally, they had fused into a single being, and several embedded Indios cried out that they must take the name of Ushumare, the serpent god who had given the creature life. But Apollonio understood that the unleashed force was in fact another deity, Naneromoi Papa, the shape-shifting, avenging god of his defeated and brutalized people. From what secret source did this knowledge spring? He didn't care, couldn't care, about such mysteries. The wonderment that had filled his mind was yielding to the intimations of his approaching death. And yet, for an instant he felt absurdly happy to have become one with his fellow sufferers, joined to them in this judgment of flesh. He experienced the full majesty of their collective strength when the ectoplasm at last reached the exercise yard. The monster was so huge, and its aspect so terrible, that its sudden appearance drove guards and soldiers into a panic. Some attempted to swivel their machine guns around and open fire on the slimy horror erupting from the bowels of the prison. Others went for their rifles and pistols. But before a single shot was fired, the serpent filled the entire yard with its immensity, slithering in a circle, now coiling, now uncoiling, so that a great vortex of viscous glue seized Sepultura, pulverizing the buildings, cracking the outer ramparts, toppling the watchtowers, sucking the guards to their doom. Sinuating through the rubble that had once been a prison, the ectoplasm soon reached the main gate, its pylon still intact, framing the full moon. The serpent made ready to strike, gathering itself into a horrendous rising wave of organic and inorganic matter. Apollonio knew that the end was near. An instant before the wave came crushing down, he managed to grasp Ulysses' hand, warm and vibrant. The impact cut Apollonio's spine in half. He surrendered himself to death. His final vision was of a united tribe, a single people, their clustered spears held high against those who would destroy them. Deep in the jungle, an unnamed god blessed their holy struggle. 12. Standing in the open doorway of the Knesset hut, Olavo and the Babaloa watched the mass of ectoplasm destroy Sepultura, a huge python attacking its prey. As the serpent twisted and writhed, the buildings crumbled, and deep fissures appeared in the outer ramparts, the jagged fault lines running from one watchtower to the next. Slimy orbs of residual glue oozed through the cracks and streamed across the plain. For a few minutes, it looked as if the main gate would remain standing, but then the beast threw itself upon the pylons, and they crashed to the ground, hurling a vast plume of debris into the night sky. The pulsating worm slithered toward Sao Paulo. Inside the hut, the drums had fallen silent. The babalao swallowed another shot of pemba. Oshimara is in a rage tonight, he rasped, his voice thick with alcohol. All men are powerless before the serpent. Olavo shrugged. Nonsense. Once the phenylalanine ATP dries out, the glue will harden again. Look, the thing has stopped moving already. The old man coughed and squinted into the darkness. You mean this was all for nothing? He asked after a moment. For nothing, Olavo said. Not at all. Don't you understand? There is one less prison in South America now. He stepped away from the hut, then turned and faced the babalao. You call that nothing? Olavo didn't wait for an answer, but hurried into the favela. He was swallowed by the bitter cold of the waning night.